Hey everybody, I'm Aleece and we're talking Cujo, the novel and the movie.
Is it just me? Or is it getting crazier out there?
My name is Aleece and welcome to the Late Late Horror Show. So, at this time, exactly 1 year ago, I had just begun rehearsals for a play called Sylvia, a dramedy about an empty nester couple who is tested when the husband adopts a stray dog named Sylvia, who quickly becomes the apple of his eye and the rival for his wife's affection and attention. I played the titular dog, Sylvia. So, reflecting back on my time playing a dog, getting into the mindset through both the dialogue and with the connections I brought to the part, I couldn't help but also reflect on probably the most iconic singular horror hound in modern fiction, Stephen King's Cujo. And Cujo has also been on my mind because I just started reading Stephen King's currently newest novel, Fairy Tale, which features a good old girl named Radar and also references Cujo. Leave it to Stephen King to reference himself in his own work. And the timing of this is also particularly felicitous because when I went to watch Cujo on Amazon Prime earlier this week, it was actually only going to be on Prime for about 8 more days. And then yesterday, the newest episode of the KingCast podcast dropped, and the subject was Cujo. So the stars aligned for the focus of today's discussion. Now, heads up, there will be spoilers aplenty. It's kind of intopical. It's kind of impossible to talk about Cujo, either the book or the film, without getting into spoiler territory. And the book was released in 1981, the movie in 1983, so I figure that gives it a bit of a pass. But if you have not read the book or watched the movie and would like to do one or the other and don't want anything to be spoiled, I would recommend pausing the video, go do that, and come back once you've had your Cujo fill. With that, let's dig into Cujo and see if there's nothing wrong here or if we've got a few bones to pick. Hi, Hungry. I'm Dad. So, the story of how Cujo came to be is quite the tale in and of itself. Doggone it, I'm on fire tonight with these puns. So, in the fall of 1977, Stephen King moved to England to write a ghost story. It did not go well, and 3 months into their year-long stay, they cut their trip short and came back to the States. However, in the UK, Stephen King read an article about a boy in Portland who was killed by a St. Bernard. And then he remembered the previous year when he'd taken his motorcycle to a repair shop in the middle of nowhere to get it fixed. He managed to get his bike in the driveway, but it stalled and died right in front of the mechanic's house. From across the road, he heard growling and turned to see a massive St. Bernard approaching. And the dog only stood down when the mechanic strolled out of his barn and smacked it on the rear with his wrench and said, "Joe doesn't like you very much." Then King started thinking about the banged-up Pinto he and his wife were still driving around, purchased with his $2,500 advance from his publication of Carrie. And he started to wonder, what if the Pinto broke down with his wife in the car? What if it broke down with his wife and maybe one of their kids? What if the mechanic wasn't there to stop the dog from attacking? And even worse, what if the dog was rabid? So Cujo is pretty famously known as King's drunk book. In his memoir on writing, King says, "At the end of my adventures, I was drinking a case of 16-ounce tall boys a night, and there's one novel, Cujo, that I barely remember writing at all. I like that book. I wish I could remember enjoying the good parts as I put them down on the page." And for in case anyone's counting, that's 3 gallons of beer a night. I am amazed and so thankful that our guy even survived. And it's pretty incredible that, in spite of, or maybe because of, writing in a drunken haze driven by nothing but instinct and imagination and his own subconscious, King crafted such a compelling, tragic story that's as much about the ordinary demons of random happenstance that can infect one's life as it is a mother and son trying to survive being trapped in a car by a rabid dog. And one of my favorite elements about the book is that portions of it are told from Cujo's perspective. His internal monologue isn't so much the full structured sentences, the way we humans think ourselves, as much as words and feelings. They're in all caps. He talks about the boy, the woman, the man. And it's just devastating to experience how his mind just degrades as the rabies takes hold, and how he's just a sick, confused dog reacting painfully and violently to his disease that he doesn't understand. And also, Stephen King is just so good at writing dogs. Whether it's from the dog's point of view, as in Cujo, or a little bit of Kojak in The Stand, or just the human characters relating to or reacting to the dogs, it's just so real, and oftentimes the best examples of what a powerhouse is, King is at characterization. And King writes Cujo as a metaphor, how even the best of us with the best intentions can go south when an outside influence takes hold of us, whether it be rabies, infidelity, discontentment, addiction in Stephen King's case. And Cujo is, in my opinion, one of King's most tragic figures because he is a good boy. He loves his family, especially the boy, and he lives in fear of being a bad dog. It's interesting and kind of sad that for many, the name Cujo brings to mind a vicious beast that's to be feared, when really he's just a good doggo who's simply a victim of fate and happenstance. And Cujo's the rare Stephen King novel that has nothing to do with the supernatural. Now, granted, in the novel, it is implied that the spirit of Frank Dotz, the serial killer from his previous novel, The Dead Zone, is the monster in the closet and also kind of possesses Cujo through the rabies, but it's barely a plot point, and if you remove it, it doesn't change the story at all, and the film version omits that aspect completely. And everyone remembers the broad outline of Cujo. Woman and kid get trapped in car by rabid dog. But the book and the film have a very interesting structure. Lots of suspense stories have 2 or even 3 plot points going along parallel tracks and then converging at some point, usually towards the climax. In Cujo, the 3 plots stay separate largely for most of the book, and really one only intersects quite at the tail end. So first, plot point 1, we have Donna Trenton and 4-year-old son, little Tad, who drive out to the mechanic Joe Camper's house in the sticks to get their Pinto's faulty needle valve fixed. They get to the shop at about page 145 out of 300 of the book. So at this point, we as the readers know Donna pretty well. She's kind of self-involved, not too smart, and very, very passive in a crisis. She's not a bad person, she's not a bad mother, but she is flawed. Donna has grown discontent and dissatisfied with her status as a homebound wife, and prior to the beginning of the novel, she has sought affirmation in her waning youthfulness in the arms of another man, the local tennis pro, woodworker, town stud, completely awful once the niceties are abandoned, Steve Kemp. Tad, on the other hand, is a tantrum-throwing kid scared of his own shadow. But King writes him very keenly aware of the discontent in his parents' marriage, and it's a nice insight from Stephen King, who, if anything, has become a really great depictor of the inner lives of children. Now, plot number 2 tells the story of Donna's husband, Vic, whose little tiny advertising company is losing its biggest client thanks to a breakfast cereal that has a red dye that turns everything coming out of either end of its eaters a startling bright red. The ad he comes up with features a professor character, and the slogan is, "Nope, nothing wrong here." So Vic's ad agency becomes the scapegoat of the whole campaign, and they have to go to New York to try to resolve it. And the night before he and his partner Roger are set to leave, he finds out through an anonymous letter, which turns out to be written by the jilted Steve Kemp, about his wife's affair. In a scene that King says he really dreaded writing, and she confesses everything, her frustration, her boredom, and her fear of getting old. The two agree to try to make things work, but Vic's not so sure. The third plot line involves Joe Camber himself, the owner of Cujo and husband of Charity, father of young Brett. Brett is older than Tad, but still very much at risk of following in his father's footsteps. So Camber, he's a nasty redneck who beats his wife and wants nothing more than to drink hooch, see hookers, and spend money on baseball. And he's a good mechanic. That's really his only redeeming quality. But saying that it's Joe's storyline isn't really true, because it really, in the book, is more about his wife, Charity. She's pretty pious, penny-pinching, prim, a little judgmental. In a lot of other Stephen King books, she would be the kind of evil Christian figure. But in Cujo, he gets inside her skin. Charity wants a better life for their 10-year-old son, Brett. And her marriage to Joe is like a secret war for Brett's soul. She lives in fear of losing her son to the sexism, the callousness, and just the meanness that Joe displays. Joe wants Brett, on the other hand, to become just like him. He wants him to inherit the house, the land, his business. But then Charity wins $5,000 in the lottery, and she negotiates a trip to see her sister in Connecticut, hoping that he will see a different way of life and hoping that he will see that there are other ways to live, unlike his father. Now, revisiting Cujo, I'm really impressed with the nuance that Stephen King takes with the whole affair Donna has with Steve Kemp. In many other works involving infidelity, one of the partners is usually villainized in some way. Like, if we're meant to sympathize with the cheating partner, the other partner is somehow demonized. Maybe they're abusive, or they're distant, they're a bad parental figure, or maybe they're just too focused on a job or on wealth or social status. I mean, hell, that's the basis of like nearly every Hallmark Christmas movie there is. And then if we're meant to sympathize with the cheated on party, typically the one having the affair is characterized as being a morally bereft, selfish, lust-driven monster. In Cujo, neither Donna nor Vic are bad people. Vic is a devoted father, a loving husband. He secured his family this very comfortable upper middle class lifestyle. And yes, he is devoted to his work as well, but it never comes across as a point of contention or at the expense of his family. And when he finds out about the affair, he doesn't become violent or vindictive. Like, he doesn't even shame Donna or really even rebuke her. He is just heartbroken and confused. And Vic is not the reason that Donna strays. Her reasons are both internal and external, but it's not due to any failing on Vic's part. Also, it's not a matter of she married the wrong man or Steve Kemp is her real love. She knows she doesn't love Steve. We know she doesn't love Steve Kemp. And during the conversation where Vic finds out about the affair, King offers some really beautifully put commentary on some very difficult feelings to express through Donna. King is really tapping a well, often not spoken, with one quote that I particularly like of Donna's. You dust the empty rooms and you see the wind blowing outside sometimes. Only sometimes it seems the wind's inside, you know? So you put on a record, Bob Seger or J.J. Cale or someone, and you can still hear the wind, and the thoughts come to you, ideas, nothing good, but they come. The conversation as a whole is breathtaking and really the heart of the Trenton storyline. There's a real fear of getting older, of settling in, of taking up the position life has handed to you. And the most stark feeling of Donna is the fear of watching the world take slices of herself away and slices of Tad away. She mentions him going to school, to middle school, then to high school. It's all a ride she's being taken for, one she's wondering how she found herself in the first place. And these moments in the book are often the most eloquent and real, and the most terrifying, because these fears and these notions that King has are very, very real. And in Cujo, effort isn't rewarded. Instead, rewards come randomly, just as tragedies do. Donna takes action and ends up killing Cujo, but too late to save Tad, who dies. He dies in the book. Something King said he didn't know would happen until he was writing it. Vic and Roger have their company saved, but not through any effort of their own. It's not any big idea. The cereal company has a last-minute change of heart and stays with them as a result of an internal power struggle. And Brett does get saved from his father's influence, but not by Charity's efforts. Instead, Joe is killed by Cujo and taking the decision away from Charity entirely. In the final act of the novel, the Pinto, the dog, the blood, the death, the bites, it's all what we no doubt remember and know best about the story itself. But here's the thing. Without Cujo, Charity Camber wouldn't have the fresh start that she so desperately yearned for. Free from the permissions of Joe, she can raise Brett to be a better man than his father, to be a better man than, say, Steve Kemp. And in no doubt what would probably be a post-credit sequence in a modern-day movie, she even gets Brett a new puppy, one that is vaccinated against rabies. Donna and Vic, on the other hand, without Cujo, would still be sort of wading through the post-affair twilight zone, if not for the standoff with the good dog who became bad dog. In effect, the thing they both love most, Tad, being removed from the equation, ultimately brings them closer together. And this is another departure King takes from other stories and often reality, the loss of a child uniting a couple rather than driving a wedge between them. And as awful as that might seem, there is some logic behind it. Cujo didn't take Tad away from them. Heat stroke, dehydration, extreme thirst, like ungodly conditions inside the Ford Pinto did. Donna tried everything she could to keep him safe, to sustain him, and Vic acknowledges this, and he doesn't blame her for Tad's death. And she even puts herself physically in between them, getting herself a treatable case of rabies in the process. Tad's death isn't a punishment for Donna's affair, or for any sins of the parent. Just as Cujo contracting rabies from a random bite of a bat was no one's fault, Tad's death is no one's fault. Cujo and Tad are both victims of complete fate and horrible, horrible happenstance. And as dour of an ending as the Trentons get, they both exchange I love yous, and little by little, King lets us know that they will get by. They'll help each other together, and things will get better for them. That might not have been the case for this couple earlier in the story. I mean, they'll always feel Tad there, they'll always miss him. But their love has been fortified by the circumstances of the Cambers property. And as any constant reader knows, some of the most underappreciated elements of King's work are his periphery human monsters. One of Cujo's big bads, Steve Kemp, along with Joe Camber, is a total example of this. We get something a little unusual with the character of Steve Kemp. He's a tennis player, a woodworker, he's a poet. He's depicted initially as a more artiste than a classic abuser. He presents himself as a forward thinker, a right side of history kind of guy. Yet under his phony calm lies a really vicious, depraved man-child. I've known a couple of Kemps in my lifetime, and sometimes they're the most dangerous of all, because you don't know who they really are until they're too close. Now, there's a movie based on this book I just talked about, right? So let's talk about that. Like the novel, the way the film Cujo came about is very, very interesting itself. Well, Cujo, as we know it, is filled with suspense and anguish. We very nearly got a very, very different take. Director Peter Medak, who directed The Changeling, he was initially brought on to direct, and he was going to bring in the supernatural, nightmarish elements from King's novel. In the novel, Tad is plagued by nightmarish visions before anything happens with Cujo, and it would have had this ghostly apparition possess Cujo, not nodding that to the dead zone, as in the book. 2 days into filming, well into this elaborate shoot with complicated angles, producer Dan Blatt's patience wore thin, and he fired Medak along with DP Tony Richmond. King recommended director Louis Teague because he was really impressed with his prior work, Alligator. Then the subsequent screenwriter, Don Carlos Dunaway, cut out anything pertaining to the supernatural. Now, King himself actually worked on a screenplay prior to Teague and Dunaway's involvement. And it was markedly different from his own novel, which is really interesting to me, given that King took so much umbrage with Kubrick's many deviations from the source work for the film version of The Shining in 1980. And Teague's final product is overall a very faithful adaptation of the novel Cujo, with one notable, glaring, drastic change: the ending. I'll circle back to that in a little bit. So Teague's experience on alligators, in which he had to shoot around a 26-foot-long rubber alligator that didn't work like it was supposed to, really primed him to working with not-so-cooperative animals, and also a child. For Cujo, he used a variety of techniques to handle the dog element. So there are between 4 and 9 different dogs, St. Bernards, playing Cujo. The exact number of how many dogs were used differs depending on the source. Some say 4, some say 6, some say as many as 9. Doggone it, who the hell knows? Each one was trained to handle a specific task, like some lunged, some barked on command, some were filmed just to be running from a distance. They're not an easy breed to train, and the dog trainer initially tried to persuade Teague to go with an alternate breed, which he ultimately declined. He stuck with the St. Bernard. Despite the menacing nature of Cujo, many of these dogs couldn't stop wagging their tails during shooting, so they would have to tie their tails down. And it's really cute. If Cujo was made today, it probably would be CGI'd like the dire wolves in Game of Thrones. They were wagging their tails, so they had to CGI the tails in to be still. But Teague's direction ultimately means you don't really notice any accidental tail wagging that does seep into the film. There is one shot that to me was really obvious, but normally that might take me out of a movie, but it's just too cute for me to criticize. And the dogs playing Cujo also needed other special touches to appear rabid, though getting that done wasn't always particularly easy as well. One of the hallmarks of rabies is, of course, the foaming of the mouth. And the teams on the set were able to achieve that look with vinegar and bicarbonate soda. The problem the crew ran into was that the dogs would just lick it off of their faces. So they would have to apply this mixture very close to saying action before the dogs could just lap it off of their big, fluffy, droopy faces. There also was a mechanical St. Bernard and mechanical dog heads that were created by visual effects designer Peter Knowlton to handle the more dangerous stuff like shots of Cujo ramming his head into the side of the car. Teague even had he had a backup dog in a Labrador in a St. Bernard costume, which ultimately wasn't used. And stuntman Gary Morgan wore a giant St. Bernard suit for a few shots as well. And the camera tricks, the direction, and the clever editing make it nigh impossible to tell at one point there is a real dog or the animatronic or the person in the dog suit. And it's really impressive. And then we have cinematographer Jan de Bont, who replaced Tony Richmond, who brings a wonderful quality to the film. He is probably best known for directing Speed and Twister and for being the director of photography for Die Hard. Also Hunt for the Red October and Basic Instinct. So de Bont's got a pretty impressive career under his belt. And his cinematic flair really shines through in Cujo. Like the opening scene where an adorable Cujo is playfully chasing a bunny through this sunlit field. And it's very beautiful, and it presents nature as something comforting and idyllic. And then everything about the scene is like, aw, shucks, look at that puppy chasing the bunny. It's so cute. And then Cujo chases the bunny into a cavern and gets his head stuck. And we see it's backlit in a really good way. And I'm very impressed with how they actually shot this scene with the dog's head stuck in the hole into the cavern. And then the bats start screeching and the music swells and the score, everything mounts until a bat bites down on poor Cujo's nose. And that switch is kind of a microcosm of the film to come, the friendly side of like the natural world and all its cuddliness and sunshininess transforming into something violent and terrifying. And in the beginning of the film, little Tad is scared of the monster in the closet, and there is a trick de Bont does where it seems like the room is stretching. And I love how that just captures just that childlike terror of nightmares and the monster in the closet. And it feels like your escape route and is just so far out of reach. It's really, really well done. Now, people love dogs, and they're not a fan of seeing them get hurt. And while the idea applies to beloved pets, things still don't really change much, even when you're talking about a canine with a diseased mind and killer instincts going haywire. And so this is something that Louis Teague and Jan de Bont understood very, very well. So in the making of Cujo, the choices that they made in the cinematography clearly demonstrate this. We never actually see Donna harm Cujo. especially in the scene where she has her final confrontation with a broken off bat. We see a lot of it from Cujo's perspective, so you don't actually see any contact. And I think that was a very, very wise move, because even with Cujo trying to get at them, it would just be such a bummer to actually see him get hurt. And no dogs were harmed in the making of this movie, which makes, I already enjoy the movie, but that just gives me a huge sigh of relief. And then we have the score by Charles Bernstein. And it's one of my favorite scores among the Stephen King film adaptation. He met Louis Teague like nearly a decade before Cujo, but this was their first time crossing paths professionally. And they were both brought onto the production by producer Dan Blatt, and Bernstein followed Teague's lead with making the score very, very thematic. And okay, there are brief moments in the score that feel slightly derivative of the John Williams Jaws theme. And it's kind of funny because there's one point in the film where Tad does a little Jaws thing at the table and he's going the dun dun dun, and he has a cute father-son moment. It's sweet. But in light of that, I kind of have to wonder if Bernstein's score in those elements was intentional. Either way, it personally doesn't bother me much. And Bernstein went on to create the score for Nightmare on Elm Street, and other horror movies, which I just think is super, super neat. And aside from the technical it'd be wizardry if I could say words. The technical wizardry both behind and in front of the camera, Cujo is known for two standout performances: Dee Wallace as Donna and Danny Pintaro as Tad. Now, Dee Wallace as Donna is interesting because half of the film, she feels almost like she's miscast, while the other half, she is just spot on. So Donna, prior to the Pinto breaking down at the Cambers property, prior to the altercations with Cujo, is relatively passive, and she feels all at sea with her marriage and her affair and just her place in life. And Dee Wallace just has this natural air of strength about her. So Donna's turn from this confused, avoidant housewife to lioness protecting her cub feels less rewarding in the film than in the novel. But however, the desperation, the moments of rage and frustration and primal protective instinct are masterful in Dee Wallace's hands. She's exhausted and driven to her physical and mental limits, yet we fully believe that she is capable and that she can somehow save the day despite all of the elements and despite getting bitten by Cujo himself. And she is just such a force on screen. And the makeup, I want to say, making both Donna and Tad look increasingly dehydrated is incredible. But even despite that, as Dee Wallace somehow retains this luminous quality. She's just so wonderful. And I think most people know her best as the mother in E.T. So you can't help but just kind of love her. And her eyes, oh my gosh, the way that this actress is able to express and say so much just through her eyes is a wonder to behold. And then we have little Danny Pintaro as Tad. He delivers such a remarkable performance, and not just, a good performance for a child actor. Every time Cujo attacks the car, his screams, his cries, his tears feel 100% genuine. It's so gut-wrenching to watch him. And I really have to wonder if he wasn't a little bit traumatized by the making of this film. By all accounts, and he himself says no, but man, his acting is just that convincing. And It breaks your heart, whether you're a parent or not. Like this poor kid, not only being terrified out of his life, but also gradually succumbing to the elements. And there's one scene where Tad starts seizing up due to the dehydration and the heat, and it's probably the most unnerving shot in the entire movie. His eyes roll back into his head and he's kind of clutching like at his throat, and it's just disturbing to watch. But fun fact about Danny Pintaro, as of 2019, he was a vet tech, so that's kind of fun, you know? He started off with dogs, went on to do Who's the Boss, and then now he's back with hanging out with animals and probably lots of maybe other St. Bernards, so that's fun. So the scenes in the movie of Donna and Tad trapped in the car are absolutely the highlights of the film in terms of both the performances and the technical aspects. Multiple cars were used, and some cut in half, some with the roofs completely shorn off to achieve different camera angles and different shots. And one of the most well-known shots of the film is after one of Cujo's rampages. Tad is screaming and the score is pounding, and Jan de Bont does a multiple 360-degree rotation with the camera, and it's frenetic and drives home the helplessness and the insanity of the situation. And it's probably one of the earlier movies to attempt and really achieve doing a shot like that. It's really impressive. But for me, between the spinning camera and Tad screaming and just the music blaring, it's like, flames, flames beside my face. So I just like, my anxiety, stop. Which is what it was going for, so good job, Jan. And the rest of the cast is fine. Daniel Hugh Kelly as Vic is perfectly nice. You don't really get much depth from his performance or from the screenplay, but his moments with Tad are really sweet, and he really does come across as a very doting father, which is really nice. He's also got this mop of really curly early 80s hair. That's fun. Christopher Stone as Steve Kemp for me, he does not sell the Lothario character Kemp from the novel. Granted, he's much less of a focus in the film than he is in the book. In fact, the whole affair is much more glossed over in the film than its written counterpart. But I just don't buy his performance or his physicality as the town stud. And funny thing is, Christopher Stone was Dee Wallace's real-life husband at the time. Sadly, he passed away in 1995, but they just have zero chemistry on screen. The only other performance really of note is Ed Lauter as Joe Camber. He's a bit over the top, but it works for the character. And as Joe, he's just utterly detestable, and he really sells the character of Joe, which makes his death at Cujo's paws, I'll admit, pretty satisfying. Now, the biggest deviation Cujo the film takes from Cujo the novel is the ending. In the movie, Donna's efforts prevail, and Tad lives. King received a lot of hate mail upon publication of Cujo for killing off Tad. And I think he and Louis Teague were aware that this child's death wouldn't work for a film audience. I personally find both endings satisfactory in their respective mediums, but I tend to agree that Tad's survival was the right choice for the film. It takes away from the themes and impressions delivered so compellingly in the novel. But the film in general kind of shies away from ruminating much on a lot of what King established in the inner workings of his characters. It's a much more straightforward story, which kind of begs the question, does the rest really matter? We never see Vic's ad company conflict get resolved. Kemp just kind of fades into the background. The affair glossed over by the near death of Donna and Tad. And Charity and Brett Camber disappear from the plot entirely when they leave to go see her sister. There's no denouement, there's no reckoning, no resolutions, just a cheesy freeze frame of Vic arriving on the porch and reuniting with Donna and a very much alive Tad. Now, Teague has said, and I'm very, very much paraphrasing, but the theme of the movie is basically like when faced with death and danger, everything else pales in comparison. You know, kind of like, I don't know, what would one's mom say to a kid? Like, oh, you're crying? I'll give you something to cry about. Like, that's kind of Teague's theme of the film. And, you know, while I understand it, I find it a bit reductive. The smaller problems do matter, and they're typically much more pervasive and far-reaching than a singular, albeit violent or traumatic event. The novel weighs the plights within the lives of the characters on equal footing with the plight of Donna and Tad being trapped in this car and facing off with this rabid dog. And I find that like incredibly honest and relatable and a little bit daring. And it's not that the film is worse or bad by any means. It's just not quite as introspective as the novel. And with a runtime of about 90 minutes for a general audience, not for a novel that a reader can take their time with, it makes sense, and the film still definitely works. Although, I do have to say, and I said this out loud while watching the movie, so Donna is stuck driving this breaking down Pinto while Vic is driving this really awesome convertible Jag. Like, man, I'd cheat on him too if he was driving the drag and I was stuck with the Pinto. But anyways, in my opinion, Cujo really is a solid film. You know, maybe the whole isn't as great as the sum of its parts, but it's so well made and it really delivers the suspense and the terror and the tragedy of a family in crisis and a poor pup that just wanted to be a good dog. So, those are my thoughts on Cujo. Book, film, behind the scenes, behind the writing? I don't know. I hope you enjoyed this installment of the Late Late Horror Show. And as always, stay spooky.